This is Arab Talk on KPOO 89.5 FM. This is Arab Talk with Jess and Jamal. I'm Jess Khannam.
And I'm Jamal Dejani.
Jamal, we have another great show today, but in the midst and within the context of really some significant catastrophic events continuing. We're broadcasting from Northern California, where the fires in Northern California and throughout the state continue to be, for the most part, uncontained, with, hundreds of thousands of acres burning, poor air quality, mass evacuations. It's really bad. The pandemic, COVID-19, is still, despite what you're hearing from the Republican convention, and Vice President Pence continues to be ravaging throughout this country. And on top of all that, Jamal, we have Hurricane Laura, which is ravaging the Gulf Coast. And last but not least, which we'll talk about today, Black men are continuing to get assassinated on a daily basis. We've had yet another brutal murder and assassination of a young Black man in Kenosha, Wisconsin. So we have a lot to cover today from our remote, somewhat fire-related, locations in Northern California.
That's right, Jess, and we're still following up on our prior conversations about the situation or the placement or the place, I would say, for Arab Americans and Muslim Americans in this whole election process and the presidential election process. We've had several interviews about this topic, and so this is our most recent interview, we're going to watch it and hear it now. With Huwaida Arraf, a Palestinian-American human rights attorney and a Bernie Sanders delegate from Michigan. Let's watch. We are a little bit over 2 months away from the U.S. presidential elections. Both Trump and Biden have accepted their party's nominations. Most Arab Americans and Muslim Americans supported Bernie Sanders, but now they are expected to pivot towards Joe Biden. Most of them are not excited. Joining us to discuss these issues and more, Palestinian-American attorney and human rights activist and national Bernie Sanders delegate to the 2020 DNC, Huwaida Arraf. Welcome to Arab Talk, Huwaida.
Thank you for having me, John.
I want to take us a little bit back to what transpired before the big show nights at the DNC. You wrote, along with two of your colleagues in the Washington Post, an opinion piece in which you said that the 2020 Democratic platform betrays Palestinians and again gives Israel a pass. Palestinian-American delegates offered 6 amendments to the proposed Israel-Palestine plan. Of the 6, only 3 were even considered by the committee, and of those, none were adopted. This was a real disappointment. Please elaborate on what happened and why the DNC keeps throwing Palestinian Americans and Palestine, the issue of Palestine, under the bus every time.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. It was a very frustrating process for us because we understand that this year is very different and doing things remotely had a different feel to it. Nevertheless, we expected to, as elected delegates, be able to participate in the process. There is a platform drafting committee. It was hard for us to be able to get in touch with this platform drafting committee, and then whatever they draft goes to the larger platform committee, which votes on it. We did not even, and members themselves did not even know who the other members or all the other members of the committee were. So to be able to get in touch with them, to inform them of our views on things and why they should insert certain things was very difficult. We managed to, I think, do a good job in light of the circumstances, and we submitted 6 amendments. 3 of them had to do with, and 3 of them actually other groups we know also kind of lobbied around, and Senator Sanders himself adopted. It had to do with recognizing that Palestinians were under occupation, so that the territory are occupied. The second one has to do with, platform language said that the Biden administration or the Democrats oppose a settlement expansion. We wanted to make sure that that was not just settlement expansion, but all settlements. And the third was to condition U.S. aid so that it is not used to commit human rights abuses. We find it completely insufficient to just say that, the United States supports a peaceful settlement or a two-state solution, and then continue to enable one party to make that impossible and not place any kind of conditions on the $3.8 billion that the United States give Israel per year. All of those were rejected. The other amendments I want to touch on quickly, because I think they're important, even though they were not even considered, they were not brought up as amendments when the vote took place. One of them was on Jerusalem. It said that the Democrats support, Jerusalem remaining the undivided capital of Israel. All we asked for was remove undivided. I mean, East Jerusalem is recognized internationally as being occupied. It is occupied territory. Even the United States historically also recognizes this occupied territory. So just remove undivided. The other thing was the platform said we recognize the worth of Palestinians and Israelis. I mean, they didn't even say equal worth. We said take out worth and put equal rights. We recognize the equal rights of all people. And then the third thing was the Democrats support a strong Jewish state of Israel. We said remove Jewish because everyone that lives in Israel is not Jewish. I mean, my own family, we constitute 20% of, that are Palestinian citizens of Israel. And so supporting Israel being a Jewish state is condoning all of the racist laws that currently exist that discriminate against non-Jews. So those weren't even considered, and I think that we need to continue to push on all of these and more. And what it shows is that the Democratic Party, unfortunately, is 20, 30 years behind the times. I mean, this is stuff that we were arguing about 20, 30 years ago, and the progressive movement and more average Democrats, poll after poll, is showing that most Democrats, if not a majority of Americans, are leaning towards sanctioning Israel. Most favor taking a balanced approach, and we can't even, forget sanctioning. The United States can't even take a balanced approach. So we definitely let the party know that they are out of step with the majority of the Democratic Party. And that is, really putting the Democratic Party in not an ideal stance. And it's not just on Palestine. That was something that we were advocating for, but we also had alliances with and worked very hard together with those advocating for Medicare for all, for those advocating for stronger, police reforms, environmental issues. The platform made some adjustments and some improvements on Palestine specifically. There were some good things. If you want me to, I'll talk about them, but it continues to be deeply inadequate. And we were very much disappointed with the process. We felt like our voices were not heard.
My understanding also, they did not want to use the word occupation.
Exactly. So we had a delegate that put forth the amendment that the word occupation is added. And then two people rose up to speak against the amendment. And these two people were former ambassador to Israel, Dan Shapiro, who talked about, the language being good enough. And for the sake of the unity of the party, let's not use divisive words, basically. When these are not just words.
So we just stay in denial, basically.
Stay in denial and kind of sacrificing, basically saying that because an occupied people have rights, this is not just about words. This is about recognizing that Israel has a responsibility to the occupied civilian population, and it violates that with its policies every day. So if the United States rejects acknowledging that, or let's say the Democratic Party in this case doesn't even acknowledge that this territory is occupied, you are also really turning a blind eye to Israel's violations of its obligations under international law to the occupied civilian population. And so for Mr. Shapiro to get up and say, let's not divide the party by arguing over words was just unbelievable. I mean, I guess we can believe
Well, I mean, occupation is the crux of the issue. So that's kind of like really, weird.
You know what, Matt? It is, but it isn't. It is in that, yes, this territory is militarily occupied, but that's not all. In fact, as a the human rights community is slowly coming on board with this notion that, yes, it's occupied, but the occupation is just a one aspect of Israel's larger settler colonial project that has been going on since before 1948. And now this territory is occupied, but we're actually dealing with a massive, very ugly settler colonial project. And so to still be arguing with the Democratic Party about recognizing occupation that is really not in dispute anywhere is just pathetic, honestly.
So recently, Palestinian-American activist Linda Sarsour made a brief appearance on a panel as part of the Democratic National Convention, where she discussed voter engagement in the Muslim community. Biden's campaign denounced her after, I guess, Trump supporters objected about her presence and distanced themselves from her. And here is a quote from her campaign spokesperson, Andrew Bates, who said immediately, Joe Biden has been a strong supporter of Israel and a vehement opponent of anti-Semitism his entire life, and he obviously condemns her views and opposes BDS, as does the Democratic platform. She has no role in the Biden campaign whatsoever. And of course, this upset a lot of Arab American organizations, Muslim American organizations. There was a major outcry. And then recently I read that the Biden campaign apologized privately, not to Linda Sarsour, not to the community, but in a private, I think, conference call, if I'm right. What's your take on this?
Well, yes, Mr. Bates's statement was outrageous. You're right. It angered a lot of people. It was uncalled for. Linda Sarsour is a phenomenal activist, community activist. She was also a Bernie delegate. She had every right to be and to participate fully in the convention, and also as a proud Muslim and an organizer to be part of a Muslim panel that was part of the convention. It's fully within her right to be there. She should have been there. So for Mr. Bates to come out and say what he did was absolutely uncalled for. And the fact that he took the bait of some right-wing groups that the Biden campaign is not even going to win the votes of is obnoxious. So there was a lot of outcry, and the campaign realized that they made a big mistake. And then, came the organization of this meeting. The meeting that you referenced with senior Biden officials was intended to not apologize privately to some people in a meeting that didn't include Linda. No, it was pegged as a meeting to hear the community, the Muslim, Arab, and Palestinian community, representatives from each, and to try to do better. And the representatives of the community went in to demand a public retraction and apology. And so that was the purpose of the meeting. But then what happened is, unfortunately, the news of a recording of the meeting was leaked. We don't know who leaked it. We don't even know which side leaked it. It could have been the campaign. It could have been one of the attendees. We don't even know, but it just about gave the campaign an out, a way to say, well, here, now our private apology went public, so no way, they can't now issue. Whether they were going to take our demand seriously and issue a public apology, I don't know, but now it's almost done with. And the way that with the leak was dealt with was unacceptable, because spokesperson Simone Sanders came out and said, yes, the purpose of the meeting was to assure the Arab and Muslim and Palestinian, and she specifically meant the Palestinian community, that we didn't mean any offense and we want them to be included. We're trying to build this inclusive campaign, which was fine. But then the last sentence she inserted, we continue to reject the views of Linda Sarsour, which is unacceptable, because one thing that we made clear in the meeting is that civil society chose boycott, divestment, and sanctions. I mean, this is really what Linda is being rejected for, her views rejected for, because she adopts the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, right? And we made clear that this is a civil society response to the complete impotence of the international community to hold Israel responsible for the lives and the welfare of the Palestinian people. And that includes our families that are there. For Palestinians, it is our families that live there. So it might be just a word for you here or a tactic for you. For us, it's the lives of people. And for you to come out and condemn or reject is unacceptable. It's insulting. It doesn't just insult, and you're not just rejecting Linda, but you're rejecting, and not only Palestinians, because the Palestinian issue is widely adopted by the Muslim and the broader Arab American community, and even by progressives with the alliances that we're building.
Well, the BDS is an international movement. I mean, the BDS is an international movement, and it is, I mean, after all, should be protected under your First Amendment. You know, I can choose to boycott McDonald's and nobody's going to object, you know, if I said that. But then when I want to boycott an Israeli product, all hell breaks loose.
Exactly. And there are now, you know, across the United States, almost 30 states now that have some form of law, state law, that is that imposes some kind of repercussion for endorsing or in any way advocating a boycott of the state of Israel, which is unconstitutional. In some states it's been challenged. In the states in which it's been challenged, it has been found to be unconstitutional. So that's good. We know not only right, but also the Constitution is on our side. And one thing, the platform, the platform committee, the Democratic platform, the Israel-Palestine plank specifically, unfortunately denounced the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, but it did say that they recognize it is a First Amendment right. Mm-hmm. So we don't agree with it. We don't agree with any attempts to isolate Israel, it said at the United Nations, or through boycott, divestment, and sanctions, but we recognize that this is a First Amendment right. So here is the Democratic committee saying that they actually believe that all of these laws being passed in these states and any kind of other effort to stifle this First Amendment right is wrong and is unconstitutional. That wasn't mentioned, you know, by the spokespeople, by Biden's spokespeople when they denounced Linda's views.
Mm-hmm. Do you think the Biden campaign is taking Arab American votes for granted?
I don't think that they're not taking the votes for granted. I think that as Palestinian Arabs and Muslims, we have been over the last few years and decades really building up our political power, and not just within our own communities, but by creating alliances over shared issues with other communities. And this is why when the community was offended, I think the campaign realized they made a big mistake and they were trying to fix it. Now, I don't think they fixed it in the right way. I don't personally think they fixed it. Some others might think, okay, it's good enough for now. Biden is, you know, he has the rhetoric of trying to build a big umbrella and unite and bring people under, which is why it is so disheartening that you would come out and insult our community in this way. The Biden campaign has been trying to, you know, holding these meetings with different groups, with different ethnic groups, and they've met with the Muslim community separately, the Arab American community separately, the Palestinian-American community separately, to listen about, you know, our policy concerns. And that's good. They're to be commended for that. But what we haven't seen yet is what they take, at least from the Palestinian community, with regards to Palestine, and start with their language, at least, even if it's not on paper and policy, at least with their language, show us that they understand and they're willing to make change. And if they're not willing to show us that now in the campaign when they want our vote, how can we trust that they'll do it afterwards if they're in power, if they get the presidency?
I mean, you live in Michigan, right?
Yes.
And that's one of the swing states. Hillary Clinton lost it by a few hundred votes, maybe a few thousand votes, and Arab Americans can make a difference, right? And not just only in Michigan, but other states, Florida, etc., and so on. So we have had a conversation. We've had as our guest on the show a couple of weeks ago, Dr. James Zogby, and then he said, "Listen, sometimes Arab Americans, or you might need to hold your nose and vote," implying like, yeah, most of them wanted Biden. I mean, Bernie Sanders, but now we have Biden, and Biden supports Israel. We know his stance on Israel and on the Palestinians, but that's what you should do. I mean, do you think Arab Americans? I mean, I've seen this, and I've seen that those blunders that the campaign has committed. Do you think Arab Americans are going to go out and vote for Biden?
I think that right now, honestly, it is a question in our community as far as whether we're going to vote Biden. I'm hearing that people are conflicted with this, and we have every right to be conflicted. We are not in a good position, and it's not because we are one issue voters that Palestine is the only thing, at least for Palestinians and most who place that issue very high on their concerns, but it's that it's so important in that it translates really into people's lives. So when you get someone that outright speaks against you, that insults you, that it's not just holding your nose and voting for the lesser of two evils. It's not that at all. It becomes a matter of dignity. You want me to campaign for and to endorse and to vote for you when you don't even recognize my dignity, my equal worth, and you outright insult my community and my views, and then refuse to publicly apologize for it. And so it's very difficult. I think the campaign realized that part, which is why they tried to issue some sort of apology that was a non-apology. And right now, I think we have to make a decision. We realize that the danger of Trump, but in terms of Palestine and the lives of our families, things will superficially get better under Biden, but unless we're able to really get in there and make some policy changes, continuing with the track that we have been on for the last 25, 30 years under Democratic and Republican administrations is only going to make things worse in the longer run. But one of the arguments is, at least with Biden, we have access. We have access to the door. We might not be at the table yet, but at least they're opening the door for us. With the Trump administration, you can't even talk to them. And so I think people have to make their own decisions. Honestly, I'm expressing to you kind of both sides right now. In the end, I don't think anyone's going to go out and vote for Trump. But what happens in 2016, which is a lot of people going out to vote because they realize it's their civic duty, but not voting for the top of the ticket. And that's really what happened, for example, in Detroit, where Hillary would have won Michigan if more people would have just voted for top, but couldn't plug their nose and vote for Hillary Clinton. That's going to be a problem. So I hope to see more outreach, more overtures, more signs of understanding from the Biden community. And then people can actually go out and say, yes, a Biden-Harris administration will respect us, will listen to us, and we will be able to get in the door and sit at the table.
Well, on that note, Huwaida, I want to thank you for coming on Arab Talk, and we hope to have you soon.
Oh, thank you for having me.
That's the voice and the face, if you're watching, of Huwaida Arraf. Huwaida is a human rights attorney based in Washington, D.C. She's a Bernie Sanders delegate from my home state of Michigan. And
she was in Washington, D.C. She is now in Michigan.
She's back in Michigan. Yeah. Okay. And, well, Jamal, I mean, it kind of sounds, I hate to beat this dead horse, but, she's saying a lot of the things that you and I have been speaking about for a long time. And I think she represents a growing trend about how Arab Americans and Muslim Americans are feeling right now about how this race is shaping up and how people feel about, Joe Biden.
Well, we'll talk about this later on. We'll reflect on the ongoing RNC. I guess this is the last hoopla night for Donald Trump. And we watched the DNC last week, and we'll comment on that. And I said the kind of the stark absence of Arab American voices, Muslim American voices, under that so-called large tent. And but we're speaking here again, Jess, and I wish we are not talking about it, frankly, because here we go again, another murder of an African-American black man, Jacob Blake, 29-year-old, who, again, we watch it all on video, who had his back turned and shot 7 times by a cop in the back. He was walking to his car.
In front of his children.
In front of it. And then to add to this, a 17-year-old, Kyle Rittenhouse, was arrested by the Lake County Police. And by the way, we're talking about Wisconsin, right? So he was arrested. Initially, they let him go. If you see prior videos, the 17-year-old and other militia-like white men carrying firearms.
Long arms, Jamal. These are rifles.
Rifles.
Not just pistols,
like
but
vigilantes
rifles.
and what have you. And he ended up shooting the 17-year-old.
That's right.
I'm thinking about the 17-year-old, and I'm thinking about 17-year-old is preparing himself or herself for college, studying for the SATs or whatever. And this guy instead is patrolling the streets, as a vigilante. He's a big supporter of Trump, right? The MAGA part of this whole MAGA crowd, shoots and kills 2 people. So now he's on these charges, right? So I lost count, Jess. I really lost count. How many black men have been murdered?
Well,
how many shows have we done on this topic?
Well, we've been doing shows on this topic, Jamal, since we have been doing Arab Talk for over a decade now. And tragically, I'm sorry to say that we are going to continue to talk about the ongoing slaughter and murder of black men, women, and children in this country. It's not going away. In some respects, it may be getting worse. I want to say 2 things. One, about this white supremacist vigilante that was arrested by the Kenosha, Wisconsin Police Department. There's a picture of him in the front row of a Trump rally. So, yeah, he's not just a Trump supporter, but this is a young man who is so enamored of Donald Trump that he would go to a rally and sit in the front and stand in the front row. We have this, and I'm sorry to use this word, but it kind of fits, explosion of white supremacy and vigilantism, feeling as if they can just come out of the closet now with arms. I mean, what is it say about our society and culture now that white men with long arms with rifles can patrol the streets and shoot innocent bystanders at whim? It tells you a lot about what has happened in the last 4 years under this administration. Now, on the flip side of that, which I think is positive in some ways, we have LeBron James, the NBA, the Major League Baseball, and to some extent the National Football League, basically saying
Milwaukee Bucks
is enough. Enough is enough. So finally, Colin Kaepernick, 3 years later, being vindicated for what he did. You have the NBA basically saying, we're not going to play in the playoffs as a protest about what happened to Jacob Blake. Jacob Blake is murdered, shot in the back 7 times, almost at point blank range, in front of his children. So we are, as I think, as we get closer to the election in November, Jamal, unfortunately, my hunch is that African Americans and people of color are going to get even more targeted now as the white supremacy movement, white entitlement movement, white grievance movement begins to feel more anxious as they see that Trump may not be reelected.
Well, Jess, I was thinking about it. I watched the video and going back to this young now murderer, Kyle Rittenhouse, or alleged murderer. And watching the video that they've showed prior to the shooting, him marching, carrying a rifle, on his side, another guy, the same thing, gun-toting, walking around. The police is in the background. And I was like thinking, where did I see this scene? I saw this scene in Hebron. I saw settlers doing the same thing, carrying M16s and what have you, with the Israeli occupation army in the background, watching them, not doing anything about them. They're watching and it's the same thing. And I'm thinking this is the same mentality of this whole disregard of human lives, be it in the United States, the total disregard of brown and black people's lives, that the police just goes ahead and shoots somebody in the back 7 times, that the police kneels on the neck of an individual, and when people are begging him to stop, I can't breathe, they continue, total disregard. I saw the same scenes in Palestine. The reason you see Palestinian children, kids, teenagers getting killed, total disregard. It's a total society that is numb, has grown numb to dismiss these scenes. The only reason that we have this outrage, we have the NBA, of course, and I applaud LeBron James and all others, is because we have videos. Think how long this has been going on. In Palestine, we've had videos. In fact, in Palestine, it's not the average person shooting the video on his iPhone, whatever. It's usually AP, Associated Press, Reuters, Al Jazeera, media outlets. They broadcast it, and it means nothing to the Israeli authorities. And you could have the video captured for multiple angles, murdering innocent children, men and women, and it's really the total disregard from human life, the debasing of humanity, and this is what I'm seeing here, and this is Jamal, what we've been seeing here. It's the same thing.
I think you're exactly right, and it's not lost on most people in the who are rising up and confronting social, racial, economic injustice, that what is happening to Black Americans in this country is part and parcel of what is happening in another white supremacy area with the Israeli military and the Israeli government and what they've been doing to innocent Palestinian civilians for decades now. And I think your comparison is spot on, man. And I think that the more we begin to discuss this and illuminate it, we'll see the painful and frightening similarities between the white colonial settler movement that Israel was founded on and the kind of growing white supremacy vigilante movement that we're seeing here in the United States. It's no mistake that Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu and the two governments are in lockstep politically, economically, militarily. And Jamal, I have to put this out there. It makes perfect sense then that Pompeo, who's on the payroll of the U.S. government, who serves at the will of the president and is paid by taxpayers, decides to give a political speech from the old city, Mount of Olives in Jerusalem. What could be more ironic and painful and kind of disgusting to see our Secretary of State delivering a political speech from stolen, occupied land?
Unprecedented to begin with, that a serving and sitting Secretary of State gets dragged into campaigning for his president and appearing at the convention, whether it's the Republican National Convention or the Democratic Convention. That's number one. Number two, just a quick correction. I don't think the angle was from the Mount of Olives. I think he might have been on the rooftop of the King David Hotel, just from the angle. It could be a different hotel, but it's not from the Mount. I grew up there, so I know, the whole neighborhood. But I mean, here is the, if we're going to now maybe shift to talking about the conventions. I mean, here is the audacity, what I call, that he's lecturing and talking and, we have this we're making peace. Well, guess what? He was above ground, I think, 10 stories, 20, 15 stories, I don't know how high. However, beneath him is apartheid, okay?
Exactly.
So he's trying to avoid talking from the streets of Jerusalem. If he wanted to be brave enough, let him talk from the streets of the old city and show around how Palestinians are treated when they enter Damascus Gate, and all the guards, armed guards to the teeth, Israeli military guarding the Damascus Gate where Palestinians enter to shop or to go to pray at the Holy Sepulchre or to pray at the Dome of the Rock or Al-Aqsa. So he, is hanging up in the air talking about peace and tranquility. Well, guess what, Mr. Secretary? Apartheid is in the air. Maybe you were breathing it. Maybe you were avoiding to see it, but you can actually breathe it. And that's
right.
kind of like the crazy thing about it. Aside from violating whatever
the
protocol,
Hatch Act,
etc. Aside from this, his message, it's just a very sad act of denial, total denial, and disregard to what's happening on the ground right there in Jerusalem, where you have two laws governing two ethnicities. When Palestinians cannot use certain roadways when they go to the West Bank, when their home demolitions happen almost on a weekly basis.
That's right.
In Jerusalem. And then he's like trying to put this happy act, look at us, we've created this peace. One thing I have to say, and I offered my congratulations to the UAE. My congratulations to the UAE during the RNC, and I said, guess what? You've been mentioned for the very first time in an RNC convention.
Welcome. Congratulations. Mabruk to the UAE for becoming part and parcel of the political machinery of the white supremacy movement here in the United States. I'm sure that the sheikhs and the leaders and the kings and the monarchs and the princes of the UAE are just delighted right now with where they stand.
And aside from this, Jess, it was, I would say, an entertaining convention. You have to agree with me.
No, I don't.
I saw some entertainment value because the only thing that I was actually missing to be entertained by is Jerry Falwell Jr. I was looking forward for his speech.
Well, I was looking forward to see if he would get on stage there and at least have his zipper zipped up.
Well, that's why I said I missed Jerry Falwell Jr., but I was deeply entertained, and sadly, in a way, maybe people, they can sense my humor here, but our own, because that's a San Franciscan, Kimberly Guilfoyle, screaming at me in an empty room. I was like thinking, what the hell was she doing?
She looked like she had taken some medication or something. I don't know what was going on.
I don't know. I thought she was going to break into singing like Eva Peron or something like this, Evita, or I don't know what. But and the reason I say that because sadly I've met her a few times. She was married to now our governor when he was mayor, Gavin Newsom.
Right.
And then she's talking about the experience of her parents as immigrants from Puerto Rico.
Yes.
Hey, Puerto Rico they are U.S. citizens.
Well,
I don't know if you missed on that, but that she was corrected by AOC about it, by the way.
Yeah, a lot of people in Puerto Rico slammed her for that thing. But I'm glad you were entertained by her, Jamal. I was actually more entertained by Herschel Walker and Tim Scott. That they managed to get two African Americans to say with a straight face what a great job Donald Trump and his presidency have done for African Americans in this country. I'm just trying to think of the psychological, emotional, mental contortions that Tim Scott and Herschel Walker, who is,
Hey, the thing about it, every single one, and that's their theme. Donald Trump kept his promise If you remember, they always
Yes.
talk. So,
Yes.
oh boy, Donald Trump built that wall, right?
Yes.
So that's one of his promises. All,
Right.
whatever, 2,700 miles of it. Donald Trump
Right.
kept his promise and made Mexico pay for it. Donald
That's right.
Trump took care of our healthcare system. No wonder why we have now 180,000 plus Americans dead because
Dead.
of that. So what were they doing? Hallucinating, or they think if they can repeat the same lie time and time again, everyone is going to believe it?
Well, here's the thing, Jamal. That's exactly right. The Republican playbook, which is made very clear for the last 4 years, is very simple. Disregard reality. Say that if you elect Joe Biden or the Democrats, there will be blood in the streets, the country will fall apart, and continue to lie about every single thing Donald Trump has done. That's their playbook. You had Larry Kudlow, an economist, talk about how great the economy is doing, and then talking about the COVID epidemic, Jamal, in the past tense, as if the COVID epidemic and how Donald Trump saved everybody, it's in the past now, as if we're past it. It's no longer an issue. And that was troubling. And finally, I have to say that the First Lady's speech I found chilling, especially when she said that Donald will not rest until every American is taken care of. I found the whole thing, I don't know if I'd use entertainment, but in terms of packaging to his base, you can bet that this appealed to his base and to some voters who may have some skepticism about Biden. I'm going to say it again, Jamal. If the Democrats rest on their laurels,
They lose.
They will lose. And here's another thing I will say. If they keep bringing out Hillary Clinton to speak, they will lose. Hillary Clinton should not be speaking. And I know I'm going to take a lot of heat from liberal
I agree with
Democrats, everybody, if by saying that. But every time Hillary Clinton says something, and she said, if Joe Biden loses, he should not concede his loss, something like that is just going to inflame even more people and get them to come out and vote. I said this last week. I'm going to say it every week. The Democrats ignoring these issues at your peril, because it doesn't matter that Joe Biden is 10 points ahead in any state. It does not matter.
I'm going to add to this, Jess, and this is back now commenting on the Democratic National Convention,
Yes.
where they avoided all, basically, the progressives. And
They ignored them.
And they totally ignored them. They didn't have AOC. They didn't have Rashida Tlaib. They didn't have, AOC.
Well, they had AOC for 1 minute. No, they had her for 1 minute.
Well,
She
that's as a
spoke
delegate for Bernie Sanders, because that's
Right.
part of her duty, but
Right.
not to speak on behalf of the Democratic Party. And they've had Bernie Sanders, but Bernie Sanders, is towing the line and praising, Biden, whatever. But they didn't have any of those new faces that the
None.
party has been energized by recently. Those who came and won despite being dismissed and beat entrenched congressmen
Right.
like
Elliot
Engel, and replaced him handily.
Exactly.
They were totally ignored. And if this is the message, they were trying to appeal basically to the Republican voter to say, we are conservative or we are centrist or whatever. But that is not the face of the new Democratic Party.
No, it's not, Jamal. That's exactly right. And I think that we will continue to kind of hammer this point home, because the way I see it, Jamal, the DNC convention was like a Republican convention light. They're trying to package all of these things in a way to appeal to the middle. Yet again, this strategy will fail in the fall of 2020, which is right around the corner.
I mean, if they wanted to appeal to diversity, don't you think they would have invited AOC to speak? They would have invited the first two Muslim women, Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar, to even just for a photo op or something like this.
Well, here's interesting news, Jamal. The Republicans had more Muslims on stage.
Don't remind me. Not the stage. Actually, this is we've had him as a guest, Amr, on
Right.
our show, and he said that the Republicans had more Arabs and Muslims, and this is in the swear-in ceremony in the White
That's
House.
right. That's right.
They've had a Sudanese Muslim woman, and they had the Lebanese woman being sworn in as new American citizens. They've had an African man, and
A Latino.
they've had, I forgot the four, but anyway, they had more diverse faces, and that was, we know it was a show.
No, but I'm just telling you, there were more Muslims at the RNC being showcased than at the DNC. So, I know our colleague James Zutby says, hold your nose. We have to hold our nose. Well, even when I hold my nose, Jamal, I smell the stench within the Democratic Party of dishonesty, of ignoring progressive voices. And, this is not the time to alienate the very people that you need in order to win the election in 2020.
You're absolutely right. A quick story, and you're listening to Arab Talk on KPOO San Francisco 89.5 FM. We have just for a few minutes, and this is talking about the hypocrisy and the disconnect within the Israeli society. Really,
Right.
There is a major uproar now in Israel, and justifiably so. A young Israeli girl got raped in the Red Sea resort town of Eilat by 30 young Israelis, basically standing in line. She's a 16-year-old, and everybody's saying it's a shocking attack, went on for many hours, and they've been arresting these guys. Some of these suspects are minors, some are not, However, the reason I mentioned this, because a few months ago we've highlighted a story or a couple of months ago, I don't think it was longer, the raping of
It's Cyprus.
a British 16-year-old by Israeli
Right.
youth in Cyprus. And
Right.
the media, both the Israeli government, the media, and public opinion said, no, our boys are, she came under a lot of pressure that it was like an open invitation. And then since then, of course, she came even under pressure by the Cyprus police. And then later on, she said, no, she was under pressure to say this is consensual. And it was not. So here is the double standard again. This is the double standard when it's somebody is not from Israel or somebody is not, then there is a total indifference. So I hope they wake up and look at themselves in the mirror and to see how they've been acting, both to Palestinians and outside, outside, whether in Europe or somewhere else.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more, Jamal. Looks like we're coming to another close of another episode of Arab Talk.
That's right. You've been listening to Arab Talk on KPOO San Francisco 89.5 FM. Make sure to go to our website, arabtalkradio.com. We have all our podcasts there, and I want to thank our viewers on Facebook and on YouTube, and we will see you next week.
See you next week.